Hello and welcome. Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India Global. We'll get to the top stories from India and the region. I'm Gautam Roy, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague from London, Stuart Smith. How's it going there, Stuart?
Well, in Europe, we're following the latest developments in Russia. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is meeting the US President in Washington, and Vice President Kamala Harris is now seeing the brunt of Donald Trump's attacks. More on that in a bit, but first, back to you in the studio.
India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Shankar is in Laos for the ASEAN mechanism meetings, holds talks with his Filipino, Timor-Leste and Cambodian counterparts there, taking India's Act East policy forward in its 10th year. The Kremlin says Russia is open to talks with Ukraine but needs to understand Kyiv's readiness for dialogue as military attacks and counterattacks continue between the two sides. And Russian and Chinese strategic bombers jointly patrolled near Alaska on Thursday. The move prompts the US and Canada to scramble their jets. Well, first up, India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Shankar is in Vientiane to take part in the foreign ministers' meetings under the ASEAN framework in the format of the ASEAN-India, East Asia Summit and the ASEAN Regional Forum. Dr. Jaishankar reached Laos on Thursday to participate in the ASEAN meetings. He expressed anticipation for strengthening ties with the bloc as India celebrates a decade of its Act East policy. The meeting of the foreign ministers from the ASEAN region will be followed by two meetings in Vientiane, Lao PDR, between the 25th to the 27th of this month. They are set to address key global issues that will be attended by officials from the US, European Union, Japan, China, Russia and more. Now, the External Affairs Minister is also holding meetings with his counterparts from other countries while in Laos. He met his counterpart from Philippines, Enrique A. Manalo. Both the leaders discussed strengthening the relationship and partnership in Indo-Pacific with a view to uphold rule of law and ASEAN centrality in the region. And India's External Affairs Minister also met the Foreign Minister of Timor-Leste, Benedito Freitas. While they focused their discussions on their views and priorities in the Indo-Pacific region, they also exchanged views on issues of mutual and regional cooperation. Let's get you more on this from DD India's Jessica Taneja joining us from Delhi. What is the perspective of India in a decade of Act East when the ministers headed to this key set of meetings that are taking place in Laos, Jessica?
That's correct. It's been a decade of India's Act East policy. Remember, earlier it was called the Look East policy, and giving it a certain heft over the last 10 years. You've seen how the trade between India and the ASEAN nations has increased to more than $100 billion, touching close to $100 billion. And in the recent, when you've seen in the last decade, in 2014, it was capped at around $45 billion. So, of course, on the trade front, the economic front, it has blossomed over the years, but also key priorities for India at this point is also focused on maritime security and how to enhance that, as India openly advocates for a free and open Indo-Pacific, and that has been its primary outlook to the ASEAN Act East policy as well. Now, looking at what further areas of cooperation we could see, particularly in terms of trade, and also many other countries are currently India is engaged actively with the 7 ASEAN nations who also became part of the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework in the last 2 years. So that has, of course, added some momentum to India's engagement with the ASEAN nations. And this visit perhaps cements India's further commitment to what it looks at as strengthening ties beyond very, very regional issues. And also this time around, you'd notice the point of contentions have been the civil unrest in Myanmar. So one that is, of course, being discussed as well, Gautam.
All right, well, let's see how things progress on those fronts, trade and of course these strategic concerns, be it the Indo-Pacific or even Myanmar, where of course India is a neighbor of that country which has been under military rule since 1st of February 2021. Thanks. Now, UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy visited India on Wednesday, and speaking on this, India's MEA spokesperson has said that the meeting happened a month of his swearing in. He said that both sides recognize positive movement on FTA negotiations and hope for mutually beneficial outcomes.
We had the visit yesterday, the official visit of UK Foreign Secretary. This has happened within 1 month of the swearing of the new government in UK, and it speaks of the kind of commitment that is there on both sides and on the UK side as well on strengthening this partnership. UK Foreign Secretary met with the Prime Minister, called on the Prime Minister. He also had a meeting with external National Security Advisor and then bilateral discussions with the External Affairs Minister. Both sides recognize that positive movement have happened on the FTA negotiations, and hopefully both sides will take this forward.
And the MEA's spokesperson during the weekly media briefing also said that around 6,700 Indian students have returned to India from Bangladesh following the unrest in that country.
So far, we have had over 6,700 Indian students who've come back from Bangladesh. We've received excellent cooperation from the Bangladeshi government. Our High Commission has arranged for their safe and secure travel to the border crossing points or to the airport, as the case may be. They also have several helplines. Both our High Commission and our Assistant High Commissions, they are operating 24/7 helplines. And all the people who are there, our students and our nationals, they can reach out to them, and they have been rendering whatever assistance that has been requested for.
Now, the Kremlin has indicated that it is open to talks with Ukraine depending on Kyiv's own state of readiness for dialogue. DD India's Stuart Smith is in London and gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Now, Stuart, is there any meaningful progress possible at this stage in terms of the conflict that is taking place between Russia and Ukraine? And what has prompted really the Kremlin to make this sort of an overture at this point?
Well, it's not the first time Moscow has offered this. It's been making such offers since day one of the invasion. The ongoing question for Ukraine is at what cost? Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov on Thursday said that Russia's open to negotiations with Ukraine on ending the conflict, but needs clarification on Kyiv's willingness to engage in such talks.
Russia, in general, is open to the negotiation process. But first, you need to understand how ready the Ukrainian side is for this, and if the Ukrainian side has permission for this from its curators. Because so far you see very different statements are being made.
Meanwhile, in the latest in the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, Ukrainian forces claim to have destroyed 25 Russian drones launched overnight. Ukraine's Air Force chief said 3 other drones were lost after crossing the state border with Romania, which has been confirmed by Romania's defense ministry. Ukrainian city Odessa's governor Oleg Kiper said 2 people were injured when drone debris hit a private house in Izmail district. Authorities in the Ukrainian capital Kiev and in the Zhytomyr region said those arrested had also been targeted. Joining us live from Moscow now is DD India's Dasha Chernyshyova. Dasha, the Kremlin bringing up the prospect of negotiations once again. Is there anything new about this one?
Well, yet we have heard the Kremlin saying that it is once again ready to hold peace talks with Ukraine. Again, there are issues that are of paramount importance for Russia, such as whether Ukraine is ready for those talks, and in particular if Ukrainian advisors or curators, as Moscow describes, the Western powers are ready to give their permission for Ukraine to start those talks. The big question for Moscow at this point is with whom to talk, because Moscow insists that the president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky has lost his legitimacy following the expiration of his term earlier this year. But at the same time, we're also hearing that Moscow will find people in Ukraine if Ukraine is indeed ready.
No question, or one more question?
That is the new development this time round is obviously the timing when this is happening, and it is happening following Orban's trip to Ukraine, then to Russia, and then to China. And now the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmitry Kuleba is in China, saying that in principle Ukraine is ready to start those negotiations. So certainly Moscow is indicating once again its readiness, but again it wants to make sure that its concerns, which Moscow calls legitimate, will be taken into account, and that is taking into account the situation on the battlefield. And an interesting thing to add here is that Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesman, said that why Ukraine is making those statements this time rounds, that it is ready for talks. Perhaps, he said, that is because of the developments on the battlefield.
And Syrian President Bashar al-Assad is in Moscow. What's he been discussing?
That's right. The unannounced visit of the Syrian president to the Russian capital is the confirmation of the strong ties that Moscow holds with Assad and with the Syrian people. We also hearing that in those talks the heads of states have discussed in detail the situation in the Middle East, as well as the bilateral relations between Russia and Syria. Ukraine issue has not been discussed, and Bashar al-Assad has also stressed that the importance of this meeting taking place against the geopolitical context. So the meeting has taken place, and once again we're hearing the confirmation that these two countries do share many issues in common, and they do share similar approaches to the number of regional and international issues.
Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow, thank you. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed total victory against Hamas and condemned American opponents of the war in Gaza. He was speaking to a joint session of the US Congress on Wednesday ahead of talks with US President Biden. Speaking for nearly an hour, Netanyahu said the US has a shared interest in his country's fight against Hamas and other Iran-backed armed groups.
Our world is in upheaval. In the Middle East, Iran's axis of terror confronts America, Israel, and our Arab friends. This is not a clash of civilizations. It's a clash between barbarism and civilization. For the forces of civilization to triumph, America and Israel must stand together.
Meanwhile, the US President Joe Biden will host the Israeli Prime Minister at the White House on Thursday to discuss progress towards a ceasefire in Gaza and a hostage release. Vice President and now potential presidential candidate Kamala Harris is also scheduled to hold a separate meeting with Israeli PM Netanyahu. These high-level talks are part of ongoing diplomatic efforts to end the Gaza conflict. Israeli forces have recovered the bodies of 5 Israeli hostages killed in Hamas's October 7th attack and held in Gaza since then. The first body was of Maya Goren, a 56-year-old kindergarten teacher killed during the attack on her kibbutz community. The other 4 hostages were 2 reserve soldiers and 2 conscript soldiers killed in combat during the October 7th attack. Their bodies were found during an operation in the Khan Yunis area in southern Gaza. US President Joe Biden explained his abrupt departure from the 2024 presidential race in an 11-minute televised national address from the White House on Wednesday. Biden's address comes after weeks of pressure from fellow Democrats for him to step aside since his June 27th debate against Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump. Biden said that he'll focus on his job as president over his remaining 6 months in office. He also expressed his unwavering support for Vice President Kamala Harris.
I revere this office, but I love my country more. It's been the honor of my life to serve as your president. But in the defense of democracy, which is at stake, I think is more important than any title. I draw strength and I find joy in working for the American people. But this sacred task of perfecting our union is not about me. It's about you, your families, your futures. It's about we, the people. We can never forget that. And I never have.
The former US President and Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump launched a volley of attacks against the country's Vice President and his new Democratic rival Kamala Harris. Addressing a rally in North Carolina, Trump called Kamala Harris the ultra-liberal driving force who should be held responsible for the Biden administration's policies on immigration. Saying Democratic Party bosses were behind Biden's decision to step down, Trump accused Harris of covering up Biden's mental health. Kamala Harris vowed to restore what she describes as reproductive freedoms overturned by the Supreme Court if elected president. In an address at the Indiana Convention Center, Harris criticized the opposition's alleged Project 2025 agenda and said that Americans must recognize that there are those who are trying to take the country backward.
You know, when he was president, Donald Trump, former president, handpicked 3 members of the United States Supreme Court, because he intended for them to overturn Roe v. Wade, the United States Supreme Court, previously the court of Thurgood and RBG. And as he intended, they did. Well, let me tell you something. When I am president of the United States, and when Congress passes a law to restore those freedoms, I will sign it into law.
Adding to the delight of the tourists and locals, Italy's vintage train, also called the Italian Trans-Siberian Rail Line. You can see it here, passing through picturesque locations, including the forests of the Maiella National Park and the Abruzzo Highlands, brushing by antique hamlets and hidden settlements. Also known as the Park Railway, it runs through one of the most panoramic rail itineraries of the country, all the while bringing good revenue to the tourism industry. That's it from me here in London. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Stuart. And still to come on DD India Global. Typhoon Gaei is set to make landfall in China's eastern seaboard after wreaking havoc in Taiwan. And China says the joint patrol of its strategic bombers with Russian aircraft near Alaska, which prompted the US and Canada to scramble their fighter jets, was not aimed at any third party.
We simply throw things away when we're done using them, be it a cup, an old shirt, or a used battery. But we can do a lot better. Let's find out how.
I thought I can get a bunch of people together and we can just create this beautiful product while not being wasteful, while paying people correctly, while not throwing things into the garbage can.
Our goal is to recover 95% of our nickel, which is the most expensive, most valuable ore, including aluminum and copper, of course.
We are successfully managing waste in this small town with a limited number of people, resources, and market. If we can do that here, it would definitely be possible in larger towns that have many advantages over us.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India Global. I'm Gautam Roy. Now, Typhoon Gaei has swept through northern Taiwan on Thursday, killing 2 people before barreling towards China. Gaei made landfall on Wednesday in the northeastern coast of Taiwan. Around 500,000 households in Taiwan suffered power cuts on Thursday. A freighter also sank off the Taiwanese coast and 5 more ships were stranded. On the other hand, mass evacuations are underway in China ahead of the typhoon's landfall, mainly from the coastal areas. Gaei is predicted to pass through Fujian province on Thursday evening and head inland, bringing heavy rains in its wake. For more on the typhoon and its trail of destruction, we're joined by DD India's Laura Westbrook from Hong Kong. Hello, Laura. Gaei has already wreaked havoc in Taiwan. Tell us about the extent of destruction, and since China's up next, how well has it braced for impact?
Yes, that's right. China is up next. Typhoon Gaei is barreling towards the southeastern provinces of Fujian and Zhejiang, which have already been making preparations. They've been bringing fishing boats and other ships into harbour. They've also evacuated some 150,000 people from coastal areas. Flights, rail services and ferry services have also been cancelled. And they've also implemented some emergency response measures as they get prepared for this very powerful typhoon that is set to hit China's coast in the next few hours. They have also put helicopters and ships on standby to monitor for any maritime emergencies. Now, as this typhoon tracks north, it is expected to bring a lot of rain, and that brings with it the risk of flooding. And China has, many parts of China have already been hit by torrential rain, which has caused deadly landslides and deadly flooding. So this is set to add more pressure on areas that are already under pressure from very heavy rain in recent weeks.
Laura Westbrook, thank you for joining us. China and Russia organized joint air strategic patrols with nuclear-capable bombers over the Bering Sea on Thursday, according to an annual military engagement plan. China's defense ministry said it deepened strategic mutual trust and coordination between the two militaries and did not target any third parties, adding it had nothing to do with the current international situation. Russia's state news agency also reported that Russia and Chinese military planes conducted joint patrols near the U.S. state of Alaska, citing the Russian Defense Ministry. Now, on the 26th of July, India observes Vijay Diwas, or Victory Day, to mark 25 years of the Kargil war against Pakistan. It's a tribute to the bravery and sacrifice of the Indian armed forces against all odds at punishing heights. DD India's Vishal Baristo travels to the battlefront to bring you this report.
Presenting the panoramic view of the Kargil war, this is Lamoshan. 25 years ago, 527 Indian soldiers laid down their lives to achieve the impossible against Pakistan.
This is Lamoshan Point, and behind me is the Tiger Hill, the tallest peak that you can see there. These mountains have been witness to that historic fight, which is also called Mother of All Battles. Today, we are celebrating the silver jubilee of that Kargil war. 26 July 1999 was the day when India defeated Pakistan, and it was a decisive victory. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is reaching Kargil to participate in that historic event.
Today, as India celebrates the victory, the sacrifice of the Indian soldiers is relived as the microlight plane of Indian Army passes by with Kargil Vijay Diwas flag. Every minute detail of the war is encrypted in this movie that is played before the families of the war heroes and the Indian Army, who watch with tears in their eyes. Fought for 2 months, the war finally ended on 26 July, but the memories are still fresh as Vishal Batra narrates the sacrifice of his brother, Captain Vikram Batra, who was awarded Paramveer Chakra, the highest military honor, posthumously.
The courage, the great determination shown by every young soldier, whether I talk of my own brother Captain Vikram Batra, Anuj Nayyar, Manoj Pandey, Vijan Thapar, I think the saga of the bravery of these valiant soldiers continues, and I think it's very, very inspirational to come here because what these young soldiers did at a very young age. It's very difficult to fathom because you realize it only when you actually come and see those mighty peaks. So it's always like coming back home, and somewhere I feel it's an invitation from Vikram to come and visit him. So that's the reason I'm here again.
Kargil war was fought under the most inhospitable conditions, with Pakistan Army sitting atop high peaks and watching every move of the Indian Army.
It was a responsibility that arose at that time, and with great satisfaction one can say that our boys, our young officers, the units, all those who were entrusted with the task managed to deliver with very, very high credible results, and that is a satisfaction one looks back upon that period.
Though Indian Army lost 527 brave soldiers, the historic victory has kept Pakistan quiet for 25 years now. Vishal Baristo for DD India.
Let's get you some of the updates from around the world as well. Now, 2 British Typhoon fighter jets and an RC-135 reconnaissance plane were flying close to the Russian airspace. An Su-27 fighter jet was scrambled to escort the planes over the Black Sea, after which the British aircraft moved away from the Russian border. Inspired by Norse seafarers, a replica Viking ship has berthed at Montenegro's Adriatic port of Bar. Named Saga Furman, the ship is a full reconstruction of a 10th century Viking cargo vessel called Gnar, excavated in the 1970s. And that's all we have for this edition of DD India Global, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. And for those on go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on the DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen and download the app now. And we'll be back with more news and updates as a break here on DD India. I'm Gautam Roy, and from all of us here in Delhi, thanks for watching DD India Global.